The next session is sponsored by ACE Global Depository. ACE Global Depository provides a comprehensive range of risk management solutions across the entire commodity value chain. Please take advantage of their services and thank them for sponsoring this event. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the next session, which is Right from Processors to Consumer Brands, Get Some Perspectives on the Future of Pulses on Your Table. And our facilitator is Andrew Jacobs, who joined his family's business, A. Poortman, London Limited, in 1971, and during his early business education worked on farms and in processing facilities in Canada and New Zealand. Andrew was a pioneer of opening up pulses from China to the European market and has worked with China since 1973. He became a managing director at Poortman in 1989. And now, Andrew, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're all involved in the value chain that indirectly links farmers to consumers. I'm going to run through the common links in the value chain, and when I mention your link, please do stand up so we get a feel for exactly what functions are represented in the room today. Some of you perform multiple functions, in which case, please stand up more than once. Now, farmers are the base of our value chain that leads all the way through to consumers. So if you're a farmer or grower's representative, please do stand up. Thank you. Okay, please seat. Farmers link to local collectors and processors who improve quality by cleaning before packing for transit to consumption markets, whether that's domestic or export. So if you're a local collector or processor, please do stand up. Thank you. The local collectors and processors link to marketeers, often exporters, who market their crop where it will be consumed. So if you're a marketeer or an exporter, please do stand up. Thank you. The exporters link to importers, who between them will arrange transport from place of production to consumption and will finance the trade. So if you're an importer, please stand up. Thank you. And the importers and distributors link to wholesalers or manufacturers who will break bulk and repack into retail packaging. So if you're a wholesaler or a manufacturer, please stand up. Oh, very rare. Thank you. Welcome. And then the retailers are the link to consumers, be that through a supermarket or local convenience store. So if you're a retailer, please do stand up. No retailers in the room. Okay, the retailers are the final link who sell to consumers. So if you're a consumer of pulses, please stand up. Yeah, that's it. Everybody stand up. So the key challenge for all of us in the value chain in today's age of internet and Google search, where all information is just a couple of clicks away, is how do we add value for our customers? I contend that if we do not add value, then we risk being blown away. As an importer, it used to be enough to earn a living to know where products were grown and where products were in demand for consumption, but not anymore. The key questions I ask when visiting customers is, what do we do that you value, and what should we be doing more of to better service your needs? If our customers will share with us the answer to these questions, and we try to deliver what they ask for, then we are set to retain our place in the chain. But if we don't look after our customers, somebody else surely will. Quality assurance and food safety now rank highest on the list of customers' expectations. It needs to be a given at a time when major food manufacturers expect a no-quibble guarantee that the product they receive is sound and merchantable for the purpose for which they've bought it, irrespective of what the specifications state or the sales confirmation says. We will learn from our esteemed presenters from the worlds of pulse research, pulse processing, and consumer nutrition and pulse promotion, how they are facing the challenge of adding value for their customers or stakeholders. So first, I'm pleased to introduce you to Alan de Brouw from the International Food Policy Research Institute, which is part of CGIAR Consortium, who are investing heavily on research on pulses in the context of developing country needs. Alan is currently Senior Research Fellow in the Markets, Trade and Institutions Division, and very importantly, the flagship leader for value chains for enhanced nutrition at the CGIAR Research Program. He has a PhD in Agricultural and Resource Economics from the University of California at Davis, and prior to joining IFPRI, he was an assistant professor of economics at Williams College. Alan's research is largely focused on rural input and output markets and their role in reducing poverty amongst smallholders, often using primary source data. He recently jointly led the impact evaluation of the introduction of orange sweet potato to reduce vitamin A deficiency in Mozambique and Uganda, and is currently helping design an intervention and evaluation for introducing high iron beans in Guatemala to attempt to reduce iron deficiency anemia. So Alan, why is it that IFPRI is interested in pulses?
Well, thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. IFPRI is interested in. Let me give you a multi-pronged answer. We're interested in pulses in part because we're very interested in agriculture as a way to reduce malnutrition problems in the developing world. So we've got a number of different research programs that are based around that concept. We have largely taken an undernutrition perspective on looking at malnutrition problems rather than an overnutrition problem like we were talking about this morning. And the reason we've taken that perspective is that those problems have been largest in a lot of countries. In a lot of countries, those problems are actually getting better right now, in part because of policy, in part because of diets improving. But where do we see pulses fitting in? Pulses fit in very well in the research program that I lead under Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, which is one of the CGIAR research programs. It's one of the sub research programs. And we're looking at value chains in general as a way to enhance nutritional status amongst consumers. So in a way, instead of taking the value chain the way that Andrew introduced it, in that research program, we take the value chain from the other perspective and we say, okay, what we want to see are consumers that are consuming more nutritious diets. How can we take a value chain's perspective to find crops and foods that will help do that? The way we see that is we see 3 or 4 different types of foods, depending upon your perspective, that can do that. Pulses being one of them, and the high iron beans that Andrew briefly mentioned being an even better one. Because CGIAR scientists have found ways to increase the iron content of specific beans by 50%, which we know that beans don't have the same bioavailability as animal source foods in terms of iron, but if the amount of iron is increased by 50%, that means that ideally that means that 50% of that iron is bioavailable, and we've been also doing the research to show that link is there. So one thing that we didn't hear this morning is that, yes, beans are great for protein. Beans are great for low glycemic levels. I may have said that wrong because it's not my part of the science. But beans also are actually a reasonably good source of iron on their own, and then when we biofortify them, they're even better. So we look at biofortified crops, we look at animal source foods, we look at pulses and vegetables, and we also look at beans and pulses. But pulses are particularly interesting because they are storable commodities like grains, and so they don't face a lot of the problems of keeping foods cold that a lot of the other crops do. So I'm going to stop there and let you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. We'll come back with some further questions, but I'd now like to introduce our second speaker. Aidin Milani holds the position of Sales and Service Engineering Manager at Bühler North America for pulse processing and specialty milling. He joined the engineering team at Bühler Group in 2005 after he received his master's degree in mechanical engineering. Since then, he's been working with different divisions and departments with Bühler family of companies, including grain milling, rice milling, optical sorting, and pulse processing. So, Aidan, you bring us a different perspective for this discussion, and Bühler is a global company, so I'm sure that the comments that Alan makes also resonate for you. But how is Bühler Company preparing for pulse demand in the coming years?
Thank you, Andrew. So we have different divisions within Bühler, cereal mill, cereal grains, other crops, rice, pulses obviously, and oil seeds. And it has been fascinating to look at the trends of these commodities and these industries, also in a global scale. I think everybody agrees in this room that the pulses have been developing. So this is something that we have been observing in pretty much all of our regions, although in different forms, but also in different divisions. And when I say divisions, it could be cleaning, could be splitting, could be value-added processes like extrusion or pasta. So we have been seeing these trends coming up, and we have been trying to prepare for this. I think today we can actually look at the pulse process, the whole the value chain of it, and we can actually take care of a big part of it, starting right after the harvest all to the way to the packaging. But what is even more important is to adapt to the requirements in different regions, as mentioned earlier. So what we need in India or Southeast Asia or the Middle East or North Africa is completely different from what we do need here in North America or Western Europe. So my colleagues, for example, in India has done a fantastic job in terms of improving the efficiency of the processing plants in India. So these are the regions that the people do consume pulses. They are familiar with pulses. So in those regions, we normally focus on improving the traditional processes.
Can you quantify what sort of improvements you've been able to make in a country like India?
It is amazing. So in the case of India, for example, the main the focus has been the splitting and dehulling, because in that region, the people consume pulses whole grain. So they are mainly in the form of a dal or a split or whole grain. So basically, the main process there is splitting and dehulling. And it's amazing if you look at the amount of saving. And again, when we save, you got to be careful how to define it. Is it the amount of product that you're not losing, or is it the amount of the premium product that you're not turning into second grade or third grade product? So in terms of numbers, it could be, could be all over the map. Could be from 2 or 3% to sometimes to twofold or threefold, depending on what you're talking about and what process we're talking about. When you come to North America or Western Europe, the task is totally different. Here we're basically trying to reintroduce pulses to the market. So here we're working with our customers like General Mills or ADM or Nestle or ConAgra, basically developing recipes, developing products which are going to be more palatable to the North American or Western European markets.
I certainly hadn't realized that Bühler as an equipment company was working on recipes and utilization.
Absolutely. So we have installations in Minneapolis in our headquarters here, also in Switzerland. And what we do day in, day out is to work with our customers to generate recipes. Most of the chocolates that you will find in the market today are basically co-generated by Bueller. So we work with our customers. They have the knowledge about the market. They have the knowledge about the process. But we also have something which can help them to make a better product. The same obviously goes with pulses.
That talks very directly about adding value for your customers. Thank you, Aidin. Our third panelist is Michelle Broom. Michelle is the General Manager of the Grains and Legumes Nutrition Council in Australia, who are the independent authority on the nutritional and health benefits of grains and pulses in Australia. It provides a platform for organisations from across the grains and pulses value chain that have an interest in promoting the health and nutrition benefits of these foods. GLNC monitors and invests in new science on the health benefits of pulses, tracking consumer attitudes and behaviours to pulse consumption, advocating for pulses in the food and nutrition sphere, and communicating directly to consumers to encourage greater consumption within a balanced diet. Michelle is an accredited practicing dietitian and holds a Master of Nutrition and Dietetics. So, Michelle, you're mainly working at the intersection of consumers and companies. What trends are you seeing in pulse demand in Australia and Asia Pacific?
Thank you, Alan. It's interesting because what we're seeing is that while pulses are not a traditional part of the Australian diet, we are seeing what we call in consumer research parlance early adopters. So we see people like celebrity chefs using pulses more often. We see in our dietary guidelines advice to include pulses in the diet, even for people that are not vegetarian. Like traditionally it's been seen as a protein source for people that were vegetarian. We're moving away from that to an all of Australians kind of policy, which is really encouraging to see. We're also seeing a lot of great innovation, which was spoken about this morning in terms of General Mills. We're seeing some of that in Australia as well, where manufacturers are starting to look to pulses to incorporate them into foods. And we've got some great examples where people are working with producers, like crossing that value chain where you're getting consumer insights saying, we want more protein or fibre. Manufacturers are going to producers and saying, have you got a product that can help us do that? And there's one in Australia where a chickpea producer has said, sure, use my chickpea hull as a source of fibre in your ready-to-eat cereal. And all of a sudden they've got this great high fibre protein, good protein source ready-to-eat cereal using pulses. It's a really great innovation happening. But however, our consumer research that we run every few years at GLNC shows that only about 30% of people are actually consuming pulses on a regular basis. We'd like to see a lot more people than that doing it so that they get those health benefits.
What do you mean by regular basis?
We recommend 2 to 3 times a week, and that's based on the health and nutrition research that shows that you need to be eating them at least that often to get those sort of glycemic control and heart health benefits.
And for lupins as a variety, I think there's some really interesting things going on in Australia. So would you like to tell us a little about that?
Absolutely. Australia, as a lot of people in the room probably know, Australia produces one of the most significant lupin crops in the world, and it's been a really great time to see traditional animal feed move into more of a human consumption space. And that's been a huge amount of work by the industry to look at breeding particular types of species of lupin, so the albus lupin in WA, in Western Australia, to produce that so that you've got something for human consumption that's got a low glycemic index. It's great, it's high protein and high in micronutrients. It's been developed not only as a whole but as a split, and they've also looked at flaked product as well, so using it in a variety of different ways.
Okay, thank you. Now let's come back to Alan. What do you see as the development impact of pulses?
That's kind of a broad question, but I'll try to take it down into some pieces. So from a development impact perspective, what we'd like to see, we see pulses as a potentially higher value crop for producers in the developing world. We'd like to see them, we'd like to understand better what the adoption constraints are that those producers face and those that keeps them from growing pulses. Because we see the pulses as nitrogen, they're nitrogen fixing, there are all kinds of great benefits to producers growing more pulses I'm talking about smallholders in particularly, in poor contexts. We would therefore, if they grow more pulses, we could see their incomes rising and being able to buy more foods. One thing that I want to note is that, so we're looking at very short value chains. We're not looking at these longer value chains that necessarily that Buehler is involved in. But that said, the value chains get longer fairly quickly in the development process. This morning we were talking about how big the market could be for middle income consumers by 2020. And I think you can actually look a little bit farther down the chain in terms of incomes. There's some recent research showing that once people hit the poverty line, the world poverty line at $1.25 a day, they start to consume almost 40% of their food as processed food. And you get to $2 a day, and people are closer to 50%. And this is research coming from Tanzania, Mozambique, Zambia, very poor countries.
In these countries, what percentage of the production do you feel is for home consumption, and what percentage would go to market? Yeah,
that's a great question. So what we find in our surveys, so I'm talking about primary survey data that I collect, we find about 40% of households market any given crop. But that's much higher for crops that are really seen as market crops. So that could be in Malawi, I think it's pigeon peas. In some places, it's cowpeas. They grow those only really for the market. So there are great opportunities there to lengthen the value chains a bit.
And the fact that the storability of pulses must also play a part.
It greatly helps. It greatly helps because if the crop isn't storable, actually, one thing that we thought about researching it for the International Year next year was whether aflatoxins are an issue in pulses, but I understand they really aren't. That's a big issue in storability of maize in particular in southern and eastern Africa, are aflatoxins, which are a toxic, undetectable mold. Undetectable meaning you can detect it, but you can't taste it. So people don't know they're consuming the aflatoxins. As I understand it, they're not an issue for pulses, so that's yet another benefit for pulses.
Thank you. Aidin, what do you see as Buehler's role in adding value to pulses?
So, as I mentioned, we look at it different in geography. So it's obviously a lot different in I would say, traditionally pulse-consuming markets as opposed to North American and Western European. So if I'm talking about North America and Western Europe that I'm more familiar with as far as the market goes, we're basically looking at downstream processes. So, and by that I mean anything like cleaning and splitting and dehulling, we would consider that upstream. This is basically what we would do to get to the whole grain, and then after that, grinding, fractioning, extrusion, pasta. These are going to be the downstream processes. So it's fascinating to look at all the things that you can do with pasta today, with pulses today, as far as extruded products and pasta is concerned.
Do you consider that the X-ray machine in primary processing is going to be the new golden standard and take over the position of optical sorters?
No, they are two different things. So they're basically going after two different commodities. In the case of X-ray, you're looking at dense the material. So optical sorting is looking at basically all the optical defects, anything which is optically visible, either color or shape. Doesn't have to have a different density, for example. In the case of the X-ray, you're almost blind to the color. You're going after the density. So you're basically going after two different things. In most cases, if not all cases, you can see all the defects which are going to be seen by the X-ray using the optical sorter, but not the other way around. So X-ray is usually at the end of the line, so you have done all your processing, all your cleaning, all your optical sorting, and you have the X-ray machine at the end of the line just to go after that one piece which might have been missed by anything you have upstream.
Well, we'll look back at this in a few years' time and see how many of your installations actually also include X-ray as well as optical sorters, because the feeling we're getting, certainly in developed Western European markets, is a great insensitivity to a mineral admixture which the X-ray is able to address so well. Michelle, what type of products do you see consumers taking up in your markets?
It's interesting. I think it's definitely changing. Traditionally, in Australia at least, baked beans based on navy beans were always very popular. We're seeing a lot more what we saw this morning from the Mintel research, where chickpeas and lentils are growing in our area. Hummus is extremely popular in Australia and New Zealand. And then more and more they're going, people are looking beyond those sort of what they're traditional pulses and looking for things like faba beans and mung beans. There are some issues though with taste perceptions. If they're going to be incorporating those types of pulses into bakery products or into ready-to-eat cereals, there would be, taste, say a mung bean coming into a bread that people might not be so familiar with and so might not be as accepting, which is what they found when they tried to incorporate lupin flour into breads. So there's some great research. We've certainly got an Australian here in the room that's doing some great research on ways to dull down some of those tastes so that you can incorporate pulse products into cereal products but still get the consumer acceptance because they're not heavily don't have a strong taste that consumers are not familiar with.
Were you in the presentation by General Mills this morning?
I was.
Was there something new in there for you as a nutritionist?
Oh, it's interesting. I was just not aware of how much they were doing. We're always hearing about new things that the manufacturers are doing, but to hear the scale of what they're doing is really fantastic from my point of view, because for years I've been telling everyone I can talk to, we need to put pulses into cereal-based foods because it's a no-brainer in terms of boosting nutrition. So it was just great to see that it's happening.
And do you have a feeling about how important it is that we try and develop this Pulse brand globally?
I think it's an interesting question because in terms of consumer perception, consumers certainly perceive the intact pulse as, they're familiar with that, they know potentially how to use it. In Australia, canned legumes are the only canned vegetable in growth. Everything else is declining. So, people do know what to do with canned legumes. I don't know that they really understand the concept of it being in another food, like as a flour. So I think there's quite a lot of education of consumers that needs to go on for them to believe that the health benefits are there in those foods. So we need to do some research in that area that, when you do include a pulse into a bread or into a breakfast cereal, you're going to get the same health benefits. And
from the work that you're doing in Australia, do you think you can identify a couple of early adopters of the logo who can become champions and lead the way?
Oh, interesting question. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I think logo usage is very difficult, and I don't know, in Australia in particular, what they call real estate on pack is there's just not much room on pack. They've just introduced a whole new system in Australia called the Health Star rating, which is a government policy where they're encouraging people to put a star rating system as to how healthy their foods are. So there's a whole nother an additional logo out there that food companies are being asked to put on. So I think it's a hard sell to put a logo on pack. I think we'll get buy-in to the principle of it, and they might talk off pack about the benefits, and they might use it on their websites or in their other material, but on pack is, to be honest, is a tough ask.
Yes, yes, please.
Can I step in? Yeah, so not so much on the packet issue as on the logo and the branding issue. I think it's actually crucial for developing countries because, and I want to just relate a story about quinoa that one of my colleagues told when we were talking about value chains for nutrition. He grew up in Peru, excuse me, and he said that his grandmother used to feed him quinoa stew for punishment. And this is, so it was a really funny story the way he told it. I didn't give you the Peruvian accent, but the reason that it's important is that pulses and quinoa both can have this inferior good food for the poor, labeling in people's minds. And changing that is extremely important in developing countries. So, just thinking about Southern Africa, if that logo can show up on one package that's South African that gets kind of sprinkled northward over the rest of the continent, it's going to be a big deal, I think, because people look to South Africa, in Southern Africa at least, as a leader for everything, for language, for culture. And I mean, I'm an economist here talking about culture. But this is a real way that value is sent. So I really think that I can't emphasize strong enough that it's really important that branding is really important.
On the developing country issues, I mean, they represent a very large potential market for our products, and in particular as their incomes increase. What does our industry need to do more of or differently in order to capture that opportunity?
So that's one thing I think is the branding. I mean, if the branding is there and people see that it's not an inferior good to eat pulses, I think that'll be a really important function in the next 5 years to see increased pulse consumption in a lot of countries, other than India, of course. India is a little bit of a special deal there, that it's not as not seen as inferior as in other places. Another thing I wanted, along the same lines, another thing I wanted to say is that I think we need to make sure that as pulse products are developed, the flours and whatnot, I want to reiterate the importance of understanding what's happened nutritionally to those products. It's all fine and good to see these low glycemic indices from whole pulses being consumed, but those studies that John was talking about this morning those meta studies were based on 10 data points, and they were all based on whole pulses rather than pulse flours. So there's a bunch of research that really needs to be done and that has to be done as these products are being developed, ideally, so that we know that those nutrients don't get lost along the way.
Michelle, do you want to pick that up?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing, absolutely. I think that if we learn from the whole grain story in terms of, it's not just the intact grains that make a difference. It is actually the whole grain research is based on breads and breakfast cereals. So if we can do the same thing where we're making sure that we are investing in that research of, that whole pulse, but in a flour form, and does it have the same health benefits? Does it still contain the same nutrients that are the same bioavailability or even enhanced bioavailability? Then we need that to be able to communicate.
Thank you. Aidin, what's your analysis of the demand of pulses as a component product when compared to being sold in its traditional whole form?
Absolutely. So actually I will kind of start with answering the previous subject, which is actually related to this. So I totally agree, marketing is huge. And so here in North America, for example, when we were working on the pulse products, and by pulse products I mean the extruded products or baked products or anything which is basically made of pulses. So we are typically looking at two different categories. In one category, we are looking at the products which are already established. We take bread or brownies or pasta, durum pasta. So this is something that we're familiar with, and this is something that we are currently manufacturing using other commodities, let's say cereals. And our customers basically trying to improve these commodities, the nutrition factor or the cooking characteristics or whatever, by basically replacing a percentage of that flour with pulses. So here we have a different task. We are basically trying to make that product as close to the original one as far as taste, structure, and everything else goes by replacing it with pulses. On the other hand, we're basically trying to generate products which are made of pulses. So it is something new. So we are working on some extruded products which are just pulse products. Those chips that now are available in the market, they are not marketed as potato chips, they are just chips made of beans. And I think it's very important to market pulses not as something which is inferior or less expensive, but as something which is good on its own. So, like I said, we are now looking at both aspects of this phenomenon.
And this morning we also picked up the importance of the millennials who maybe have different values and characteristics that they're looking for. Michelle, do you want to pick that up?
No, I think you've made a very good point. Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle, how can we ensure the strengthening of the pulse value chains also means seeing more nutritious products brought to the market?
It's an interesting question. I think that we don't have any retailers in the room, but anyone that works with retail and as a manufacturer will tell you that if a company can make a nutritious food, they can make a great bread with pulses in it, but if consumers don't buy it, retailers will delete it and it will be taken off the shelf. So the key is to get consumer acceptance of those products. We need to get people that walk into the supermarkets to think, I need to put something with pulses in it in my grocery basket every week. And that's not what people are doing now. And to do that, we need to be helping them to understand why. Because our research shows that the main reason people are not eating pulses is because they just don't think about it. When they plan their week of meals, they think about protein. And the way they think about protein, at least in Australia, is what meat am I going to eat? What fish am I going to eat? Where am I going to eat? Like, what am I basing my meals on? And it's never pulses. That's never one of those evening choices that they're choosing. So we need to communicate the benefits to help them bring pulses top of mind as their choice and what they put in the basket. And to do that, we also need to be doing what John was talking about this morning in terms of advocating to policymakers around the importance of pulses for disease risk reduction, for control of things like diabetes, into our national dietary guidelines. We need to be convincing these people that pulses play a key role in health and nutrition, and that way they will be communicating for us the benefits, and then consumers will listen to the policymakers and the government and their doctors who are reading these guidelines and talking about them. So all of that is underpinning. We still need more research. We need to invest in that research of the health benefits, because regulations are becoming tighter and tighter, and we can't talk about on packaging. We can't, we all know in the room, we all sit here and say, yeah, pulses are great, they reduce your risk of heart disease, they reduce your risk of diabetes. You can't say that on a pack of food. Regulations won't allow you to, because there's not enough research.
You're a nutritionist, and are your co-professionals giving that message to consumers in Australia?
Well, they're trying to in the capacity that they can, and that's part of the role of our organisation, is to talk to doctors and nurses and to consumers and talk about what are the health benefits. We're a health promotion charity, so we're able to talk in that way, but as a manufacturer, they're not allowed to talk about that because it's not part of the regulation.
It seems to me there's a great opportunity if at the moment pulses are used for one meal a week and we can get over the health and nutrition benefits of pulses and they can be used in 2 meal occasions a week, we're going to double our sales. And this seems to me not unrealistic.
Not at all, not at all. And it's not, the studies where people are actually eating pulses, they're quite happy to eat them when they're actually part of in the trials where they get fed every single meal every day, they actually quite enjoy them. So there's they're not worried about eating them, it's just bringing them up as an idea and a concept and letting people know.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, it's not even that. If you go we were talking about 30% of people in Australia eating them twice or 3 times a week. If you go to 40%, that's a different 33% increase in demand, right? So there are a lot of different ways that demand could increase, but the right things need to happen for that demand to increase.
Okay, if there are anybody in the audience who would like to raise a question for our panel.
Great presentation and some really good points in terms of understanding that nutritional impact of processing of pulses so that we can look at issues like what is the blood sugar response when you've formulated it. But one of the things we can also be thinking about is it's not the focus on the pulses, it's going to be a focus on the carbohydrate food that the pulses are improving. So some early work is already showing that we are making improvement in corn-based snacks, in cereal-based breakfast foods, that we can make an improvement to a carbohydrate-rich food by adding pulse protein and pulse fiber. So I think there's kind of 2 ways we can look at it. It might not be as good as, in theory I wouldn't expect that it will be, but I think it's going to be relative. The question is also what is the denominator of what we're looking to measure.
Sure. I think just to respond to that quickly, one of the things I was trying to point out is that we don't know if we're worried about iron deficiency anemia and we're talking about roasted chickpeas as a snack in India, we don't really know what the iron content is of those roasted chickpeas anymore once they've been dehulled and processed and whatnot. And I think that's really what I'm interested in. Now that said, corn, Cheerios have little iron flakes in them if you burn them at the right temperature. And I'm sure that General Mills hasn't taken those iron flakes out of the Cheerios at this point.
Michelle, would you also like to respond to Gordon's statement?
Certainly. I think that absolutely we need to look at just improving health and nutrition in general. I mean, it's not just third world countries that have issues of food security and undernutrition. If we can be incorporating pulses into foods to make them slightly better and they can be seen as a value add, then that's what's really important, is that you're adding this amazing food that has so many great qualities to improve on our current food supply.
And if I can just add one last comment, I think that from the presentation this morning from Dr. Siebenpiper when he talked about this global pandemic and this issue of diabetes and the importance of blood sugar control, I think that we need to be champions of changing how people look at food and then re-evaluating the whole value chain to say how can we change the health outcome. We need to shift from dealing with the issue of malnutrition to dealing with ensuring that we have nutritional security and be looking at key measures like blood sugar response. And now we can be taking this signal right back to plant breeding, agronomy and field management, processing like milling, but then also these next steps such as baking, extrusion, sheeting and cutting, all the different sort of ways that we cook our food and measure it by the health outcome. And that will be the real revolution in food. And then when I layer on issues of water and water availability and energy availability in the developing world, I want to come back, Andrew, as you said, to this panel and in 20 years' time, because I think that we really will have a revolution in terms of how we look at food, how we produce the raw ingredients, and how we process it. Because if we shift our focus to health outcomes, everything behind it has to change as well.
Adrian, did you want to
No,
comment?
Gordon is absolutely not right, and I'm just referring to the first comment that he made about basically using pulses to kind of fortify or complement the products that we traditionally make using, let's say, cereals. And we have been doing this. Gordon is very much involved in that and spearheaded a lot of research in that. And it is a very promising way to go, absolutely.
Certainly one of the things that I've taken from today's session is Alan's call for research on pulse flours as opposed to whole pulses, and that's an area for us as an industry to pick up, and also for us to be able to learn from the whole grain experience. This morning I was very struck by a quotation which we will be able to make, we all heard it, when no lesser authority than John Browse, the director of the World Food Programme, said that the World Food Programme believes pulses are the food of the future. And I think that's a fantastic takeaway from today. Thank you, panelists.